So today we'll be drinking a raw pu'er. It is the tea that looks like this. If you receive a little coin shape brew color wrapper thing, is the tea that we'll be drinking today. It's called Liang Shan. Yeah. Remember, pu'ers are named after the locations, so Liang Shan is actually the name of the tea mountain as well. So today we're also going to use the gaiwan, the fairness pitcher, and also the strainer to brew the tea. So just make sure you have these ready, and invite a tea pet to join you, and make sure the water is boiling. All right. For those who just joined, I was just talking about how we are having the Liang Shan today, which is the tea that looks like this in your tasting kit. So what we can do is we can just unwrap this. And let's first take a look at this tea before we start drinking it. So everyone's is gonna look slightly different because they're pressed individually, so there's no certain pattern or anything. But you can immediately notice it almost has a little bit of velvet texture to it. Right? So this is because of the tea hair. Remember, tea is a very hairy plant, and both the butt and also the back of the tea leaves, you have a lot of tea hair. A lot of the tea trees that belongs to the large leaf varietals, so like the ones that you typically make pu'er into, even though it's not all of them, they usually tend to be extra hairy. So these are why it looks, if you take a close-up picture of it, it actually looks really cool. It looks like some kind of fabric. Right? So we're going to put the tea into the gaiwan. And make sure your water is boiled. So today we're going to let this tea brew for a little bit longer because it is a heavily pressed tea. So the tea is very tight and it's not likely to start release flavor as quickly as the teas that we had before. So still go around, cover the tea, but this time we're not going to let the tea come out yet. So I'm going to leave it closed, and you can do it with me at home, or you can do it after I finish doing it, so you can follow. And so let's first talk a little bit about pu'er geography. I have gone through this in our pu'er tasting video, so if you have time, definitely go back and then take a look at that as overview. I'm going to talk specifically about this tea. So remember, we're talking about these three pu'er regions. So in the north, you have the Liang Shan and Mellow region, and in the west, you have the Lincang region, and in the south, you have the Banna region. So this is a pu'er that comes from the northern tea region. Remember, it's still all like southern half of the Yunnan province. And given that pu'ers are all named after location, and location is the #1 key factor that influences the desirability and therefore the price of the tea, so it's very important to know exactly which location your pu'er comes from. Now, Liang Shan is actually considered a pretty economical mountain range. So given the teas that come from the same age of tea trees, similar processing, the tea usually demands a slightly lower price, so it's a very good introductory pu'er. It's also very easy to drink. Oftentimes people say they don't like pu'er because it's too harsh, it's a kind of acquired taste, but all good tea should not be overly unpleasant, even though it is not pleasantness that we're looking for in the tea. So hopefully this Liang Shan will change your mind about what a pu'er actually tastes like. Right? So now we can drain the rinse out. Just keep in mind, because the water has stayed in the gaiwan for a little longer, it is a little hotter, but if you grab it correctly, it shouldn't be overly heating. Okay? And your color should have a very light amber color. Alright? Can you smell it? Liang Shan smells like rehydrated white raisin. So if you have like especially those pretty plump, like a larger white raisin, if you like rehydrate it, it smells like what that tastes like. right? So keep in mind, this is the rinse, but as always, the first time we're finding out about a tea, we are going to have a sip, but you can give the rest for the tea pet. Yeah, the taste is very similar to the aroma, which is also that raisiny note. It's a little bit more citrusy than the aroma, so the aroma is a little sweeter. And I can already feel a little bit of the tannins in the tea, even though it's not a lot. And this tannins is already resulting in my mouth becoming watering. So it's like I'm salivating because of the tannins, and then makes my mouth feel further sweet. But this is a different kind of sweetness than the sweetness that I introduced the tea into my mouth. That was more of an actual sweetness. But as the tannins transform in my mouth, it's actually starting to have more of it's almost like a very sweet water kind of sweetness. Okay. So let's reboil the water, and then we're going to do this actual first brew. We're still going to let the tea steep for just a tiny bit longer, but not a lot longer. Okay. Oh, and then so this is a large leaf varietal, which I'll go into more depth in a second. But it just has such more, it has such abundant of taste. And if you smell your finished picture now, it smells really, really nice, really sweet. Okay. Again, going around, covering it. So not a whole lot longer. Remember, we're looking at how much the tea has opened up. So if your tea has already opened up a lot, you don't have to let it stay for a lot longer, right? Let's have a sip. Yeah, so the a little bit of nuttiness start to come through in this brew. It still has that dried fruit note, especially dried grape kind of note, but it also has a little bit of the nuttiness that give it a little bit more structure in the notes. It also has a slight floralness to it as well. So this is actually a pu'er that comes from 2017, and by this point you probably know the pu'er has aging potential, which I'll also go into more depth in a second. But this is was just 2 years, well, almost 3 years now. The tea has already transformed from a very umami and nutty tea to a more floral with a little bit of fruitiness kind of tea to now becoming more fruitier than it is floral. However, as the tea opened up, we are actually going to taste more and more of the floweriness in the tea. But that's also how, in general, with aging, the notes in the tea will transform as well. And just keep in mind, as usual, we're going to take all the questions at the end because I cannot see the words when I'm talking about the tea. But at the end, make sure you ask the questions, and then we'll have all those answered. All right? Cool. So, so you now know this is Liang Shan, and then definitely remember the name of this mountain because this is where you're going to find very good value pu'er if you're looking for a pu'er that comes from very old tea trees. It is also a region that actually has the most plantation teas. So let's now talk about the different age groups of tea trees the pu'er has. So pu'er actually falls into a category of tea that we call historical tea, but it's not historically famous tea. So they're actually very distinctive. Historically famous tea, well, as you can guess, historically famous tea versus historical tea, they both have a long history in existence. However, historically famous teas, such as like a lot of green teas that we had earlier, these are the teas that not only only it had existed for a long time, but it had a celebrity effect of the past. So it had endorsements of significant people in the past, either a emperor come out and say, this is my favorite tea, or rumor to say that, or you can have a poet wrote something about it, artists praise it. So just like nowadays, you have a celebrity endorsing a certain product, and that product becomes very popular and in higher demand, and therefore it's able to accumulate more resources, hopefully to be put into the further finding of that particular product. So same thing with tea. This effect what we see on the historically famous tea is basically once upon a time in the past, some important people said, I really love this tea, and all the resources goes to this tea, and then the tea get further developed, and many generations later, when we're here, these become the historically famous tea and represent the pinnacle of the tea world. And historical teas are actually mass-produced tea in the past. So, and that's what pu'er falls into. These are the teas that back in the days, Chinese people domestically rarely hear about them and definitely do not drink them. So they're made specifically in very large quantities for these organized trading purposes. Now in China, in both Ming Dynasty and Qing Dynasty, so about 600 years ago, starting from 600 years ago, and then Qing Dynasty was the last dynasty which fell, like I guess official date you can say is 1911. So so during this time period, there's always large organized tea trading activities until when Qing Dynasty is not doing very well anymore, so these kind of activity also halted. But anyway, it was used to trade with Tibet for war horses. You probably have heard of a legendary road called the Tea Horse Road. There are actually two routes that goes into Tibet for specifically tea and war horse trading. One route is from Yunnan to Tibet. The other route is actually from Sichuan to Tibet. So nowadays, sometimes you see pressed tea either in the cake form, in the bowl form, in the brick form. Just keep in mind, back in the days, the brick form actually is specifically reserved for the teas from Sichuan to Tibet. It was actually not from Yunnan. In Yunnan, it's all somehow a round shape, either a cake shape or the bowl shape. So during that period of time, there were a large amount of tea trees that were planted. And because tea trees are evergreen and without human interference, it can last for a very long time. So since the tea activity halted about 150 to 200 years ago, when China just basically, let's just say, had a whole series of unfortunate events, that tea is no longer on the mind of many people. So a lot of these tea trees were abandoned. And that gave us a group of tea trees that nowadays we call them old tea trees, ancient tea trees. You can safely say they're roughly about a 200 to 600 year old range. But within that range, we actually do not know exactly what individual tea tree is aged at. Because even though you can roughly tell the age of tea tree by observing the trunk size, but it's not accurate, right? Just like different human, you can be very old but still have small size, like me, or you can be very young. You can be 17 and you're already like this much higher, taller than me. So these kind of things happens with tea trees as well. However, if you see a large formation of very old tea trees, and you can safely assume in comparison notes with historic record that these probably the tea tree that's left over from that era. Alright, so now let's take the tea. You can put it in a different cup, or you can drink it, you can dump it. We're going to do the second brew. I would say with the stage of my tea currently at for the second brew, I don't need to let the tea sit anymore because the tea has opened up. Okay. We're going to smell the lid. Have a sip of the tea. Right? So now I definitely feel more texture of the tea than aroma of the tea. Aroma of the tea has significantly been reduced in comparison to the first brew. And Pu is not known for aroma anyway, especially after we have ventured through a oolong and also the kimen that we had yesterday, which is for a red tea is actually very aromatic. So it's almost like you're drinking a lot of things, but it's very hard to put a finger on what they are. And that's exactly what a lot of people feel like when they first time drinking a pu'er, given that it's a pu'er without any funky note. But there are a lot of aftertaste, right? Your mouth keeps watering up after that. And this is a very important thing. Remember, for the taste, we're looking at the aroma, the taste, the texture, and then the aftertaste. And also, this general area now smells really nice as well. It smells almost like a little orchid garden, right? However, the minority group that historically had been planting and harvesting and making tea in the Yunnan region, they actually, even before these government organized activities, they also started to planting tea. So every single village you go to, they always have certain tea trees that are, the villagers will tell you they're much older than the other tea trees, and they call them the king tea trees. Again, we do not know which is which. However, sometimes when you hear people talking about the 1,000-year-old tea trees, you can only assume they're probably talking about those tea trees that, just by the credential of the villagers, that they think they're not from that 200, 600-year-old era, but it was planted when they were just making tea for their own consumption. By the way, the oldest verified tea tree is 850-year-old. It was not 3,000-year-old or 1,300 years old. All right, so next group of tea trees were the tea trees that were called the small tea trees. And these are the tea trees that were planted since that mass trading era till nowadays. Actually, I would say till a generation ago when people were still planting the tea with a seed. So each tea tree were a child of two other trees, and then each tea tree will come out differently. So it's an heirloom tea trees. And they were still planted using the traditional ways. So people are finding very steep slopes and then planting with the seed, and then very careful finding the locations that it was the good direction, the good sunlight, the good biodiversity, things like that. These are the tea trees that sometimes are still a little bit smaller, and again, we're just going generally with the trunk size. These tea trees actually grow amongst the ancient tea trees. So basically you have the small tea trees, the ancient tea trees that from the mass trading era, and some of the really, really old tea trees, the villager will tell you these are their king tea trees. So these three group trees, they actually occupy the same lot. So if you just go looking at it, the only telltale that you can have is just some of them are have a larger trunk and some of them have a smaller trunk. Sorry, runny nose. So, and then next, you have the plantation tea. So plantation teas come around in a more recent time. And these are the teas, basically you start seeing rows and rows of tea tree. And they have a very uniformed formation. And the tea trees almost all bud at the same time. They are all clones, and there are several different kinds of clones that you can have. And these are definitely the mass-produced teas. And just keep in mind, the majority of the tea trees in the Yunnan province come from these kind of tea trees. The vast majority, actually. Your chance of getting his plantation tea is so much higher than getting any other tea. And the plantation teas, obviously, if you know me, you know I'm not a fan at all for plantation teas. Other than just how it's got reflected in the taste, it also have several environmental complications as well. So for example, you basically have monoculture. And when you have monoculture, not only you're exhausting the land, but also sometimes you're leaving certain disease and pests no choice but to attack the tea trees. So over time, the usage of fertilizer, of pesticides, herbicides is just unavoidable. And so you can say that these can be organically done, but still there's nothing comparing to just utilizing what nature has given you. So due to these concerns, In the recent years, there have been activities where people would uproot certain plantation teas to create more space for each individual tea tree to grow. And it really depends on the different tea gardens. People have different practices. I have seen as little as people uprooting 1 out of every 3 teas to people uprooting either 1 out of every 7 or 8 tea trees, which creating a very large space for these tea trees to grow. These are what we call the converted tea gardens or the organic tea gardens. So, of course, these are much better than plantation teas. So they will have a distinctive formation, and the plantation teas will have a distinctive formation. So basically, you will not, by looking at the tea tree, you might accidentally identify a younger tea tree for a older tea tree just because this might be a fast growing younger tea tree, or a really, really old tea tree for a regular Asian tea tree because they all grow in the same lot. But you'll never mistaken them plantation tea for any of the older tea trees because they adopt completely different formation and grow in separate lots. And the converted tea tree also grow in separate lots. This is a tea that comes from the ancient tea tree era, so it's the 200 to 600 year old range. So it comes from the mass trading era, and we have selected the tea trees that by looking at it, we think they are much larger than the younger tea tree in the same lot. Right? Now let's take this away, and then we're going to brew the next one as well. How's everyone doing? Obviously, I cannot see, but I still want to chat a little bit. So you might wonder, let's go back to the basic a little bit. What is pu'er? So pu'er actually, academically, is actually classified as a sun-dried green tea. So it is a green tea. Remember, tea categorization is strictly going with the processing method that you have adopted. So it is not how the tea would transform afterwards, and it is not how you will how the liqueur looks like and what kind of tea that you use. It's just how you actually process the tea. So let's now do the third brew of this pu'er. Remember, you want to keep your brewing station clean, so always develop a habit of getting rid of excess water. Alright. Now let's have a sip again. So this brew, the tea is definitely more tannic than the previous brews. However, it's not overly tannic at all. I mean, like I promised, Liang Shan is a very drinkable, pleasant pu'er. You can say on the downside, it's considered a little bit a weaker pu'er, but on the plus side, it's very drinkable. It's good value. It's a more enjoyable, especially if you're just starting to get into pu'er and then want to see what's the hypes is all about. So pu'er processing is a very classic green tea processing. You pick the tea leaves, and for if it's a plantation pu'er, then you pick a bud and 1 to 2 leaves. If it is a ancient tree pu'er, you pick a bud and sometimes even 4 to 5 leaves. So 3, 4, 5 leaves depends on really how old the tea tree is and how much vitality the tea tree has. Because the older the tea tree, the longer the young shoots that you can have. We actually have a video on the IGTV with me in the tea mountain explaining this if you want a more intuitive feeling about it. So you can go take a look at that. And after you pick the tea, because these are larger leaf varietals and the stems are so thick, in very extreme cases, the fresh picked long stems of the ancient tea tree is as large as like a skinny chopsticks. So with that much water content, you cannot put the tea directly into the wok. This is where you're gonna have what we call the red stamps, which is very commonly seen in mass-produced pu'er. So you do not want the tea to have the red stamp. So what you want to do again is to let the tea lose its moisture. So very similar to what we do with all green tea. Remember, you want the tea to rest a little bit, but for pu'er, it's mandatory. You have to do that. And after the tea loses enough moisture, and then the pu'er woks are very large woks. So for green yellow tea, typically we're looking at each batch. If you're hand making the tea, we're looking at about a 1 ounce of 1 to 1.5 ounce of fresh tea leaves. However, for pu'er, we're actually looking at about 4 kilos, which is a lot of tea leaves, right? So the wok is very large. That's why you see people making traditional green yellow tea. The hand gestures is always very small like this, but making pu'er, you're like having your whole body working it. Because it requires so much energy. Actually, in the region, the pu'er woks, because this is a fixture in the household, they actually is all built based on the main tea maker's height. So the main tea maker of the household, the wok will have to be built customary to a comfortable position, so it does not hurt the tea maker's waist. And so oftentimes when you go from household to household, you notice that the wok is at different positions. And then sometimes if you're not at the rough height category of the main tea maker of the household, it literally breaks your waist as you making the tea. So the wok is also have a higher temperature, just also because the large batch that goes into it. Instead of the rapid flipping like we usually see with traditional green yellow tea in small batches, we actually often need to trap the heat a little bit for the pu'er during the making. This is to create a steaming effect in the making to help facilitate more thorough kill grain, because it's a very large batch and it's very difficult to get all the tea coated very evenly, and you have a very short window to achieve the desired kill grain status. Otherwise the tea again will turn red stamp again, which will become undesirable. So after that is done, it's also very easy to burn pu'er. That's why smokiness is a common flaw in bad pu'er. But it's not okay, right? Remember, there's only one tea in the entire Chinese tea listing that's allowed to be smoked, which is the Sheng Pu, the Lapsang Suchong. Other than that, tea smokiness is a big no-no. And so people will take the tea out, and then we do need to roll the tea a little bit. This is again also because the pu'er, the tea leaf size is very large, so we're trying to help break down the membrane, but also redistribute the flavor from the inside to the outside. So when you brew the tea, you're gonna have a better enjoyment of the tea. That's what I'm usually talking about when we brew the tea. We're really realizing the vision of the tea maker, and the tea maker would have fold the flavors in a certain way, and then our job is to peel that flavor off in that same way as well. So after you roll the tea, and for the better practice, we actually usually straighten the tea a little bit as well. It's more or less for luck, and also it helps a little bit for the tea in the sun drying step to catch the sunlight a little bit more evenly. So after you roll the tea, and then this is when you start to distribute the tea in a very even layer on the rooftop. So I mean, sometimes people also do it in front of the house if you do not live in this a certain kind of villages where you do not have neighbors very close by. But it's very common nowadays for in the poor region that people will have a flat rooftop, and the rooftop be layered with bamboo sheets, and then you can just pour the sprinkle the tea onto the bamboo sheets. And also you can imagine, because this is a sun-dried tea, if you don't have the sun, what now? So back in the days, yes, this is something that it's very frustrating, and you do have to just quit making tea if it rains. But nowadays people actually build these sunroofs to at least be able to not having to hurry taking the tea inside or worry about the tea getting wet, even though the tea does not fully receive the benefit of sunlight. And keep in mind, there is a big difference between the teas that's sun-dried in 1 day or 2 days or even 3-4 days. Ideally, you want it to be done in 1 day. So very strong sunlight, have the tea done and then take it inside, that's the best. Yeah. And if you have the tea exposed without the sunroof and have very strong sun, that's even better. But nowadays it's very difficult to find tea trees that's exposed directly to the sun anymore, because almost all households now have a sunroof to mitigate the risk of raining. Right. And after that, you do have to pick out the stems and the yellow leaves, because remember, sorting is always necessary. And then you can take the tea from the farmers. So let's now finish the 3rd brew, and then I'm going to do the 4th brew, and we'll continue. Oh, my eyelashes fall into there. All right. So one thing I want to mention is that farmers do not press tea. You probably have seen the pu'er are typically in different sizes. The most standard size now, actually nowadays is getting more and more different size, but back in the days the standard size was 350 units of 357 units of whatever that is. So nowadays people usually say the 357 grams, but just keep in mind, back in the days it was not grams the Chinese use, but it's something that's equivalent to that. We'll do the 4th brew. But people peeking from outside. All right. The umaminess actually comes through more this time. It definitely has a little bit more of a savory note to it. It's still floral, but it has more of a savory kind of layer to all the floweriness now. Very nice. So pu'ers back in the days, because the reason the tea is pressed is because of the transportation needs. Even nowadays, I'm pretty sure anybody who has shipped tea always had to worry about the tea being broken or become busy. Tea is a dry product, and among a lot of the dry things, I would say it's on the more fragile side. So especially if you have a tea with a minimum shape making where the tea is a little bit larger, it's very easy to have them crumble. So back in the days, people will press them, and the reason it was 357 of that unit is because you basically have put 7 of them in the stack, and you put 6 of them on each side of the horse, and that gives you a 30, let's just say if you use gram, that'll be 30 kilo of a standard trading grade. So you have 12 of them. And so back in the days, it's just a standard trading unit, and then when you extrapolate, that gives you the size of each individually packed ones. You can also have the bowl ones, but you can imagine what a nightmare it is when you have a number like 357 for contents. So nowadays, it's very common that people press them into 100 gram cakes, 200 gram cakes, 300 gram cakes, or in the individual size like this one, which is 7 grams to fit into the 7 gram guy one. Right? So we've talked about the location, we talked about the processing, and now let's talk. In the processing, always anything from the picking to the processing, that's the processing. And then let's talk about the tea tree itself a little bit. So the varietal. So by definition, you probably guessed, if it comes from the ancient tea tree, then it is a heirloom varietal, because back in the days, people would have just plant the tea trees from the seed, and it'll every single tea tree will be different, so you do not have stabilized varietals or stabilized cultivars. And if it's a plantation tea, then it is a clone, and there are many different kind of clones that people would use in the in Yunnan actually. And you I lost my thought for a second. I wanted to talk about the large leaf varietals. So you have heard me talking about the large leaf varietals. So there are many different ways you can classify cultivars, even though in theory there are endless possibilities of cultivars, so you cannot possibly study all of them. However, when we classify them, you can classify them based on the trunk style or the bush style, and then you can have different sizes of the mature tea leaves. It always goes with mature tea leaves, because if it's the fresh shoot, it's not stabilized yet. So if it's the leaf is about the size of your thumb, that's a small leaf varietal. If the leaf is about the size of your middle finger, that's the size of a medium leaf varietal. And if the size of the mature leaves is about the size of your whole hand, and sometimes it's even as big as my whole face, and then those will be definitely the large leaf varietals. These are just like some general rules, and then usually you would do a crossover, so you define a varietal as this is a trunk style large leaf varietal, it's a trunk style small leaf varietal. You can have all these different combinations actually. And then in the Yunnan areas, mostly the large leaf varietals. However, in some of the very cold tea regions, so for example in Yunnan, one of my favorite tea mountains, because it's very high up and it's very cold, the leaves tend to be smaller actually. And as we always observe, the smaller leaves tend to be more aromatic as well. All right, so I think I have covered all now about, I should talk about aging a little bit. Even though you can definitely go to our pour session to get into more fundamental knowledge about the aging. So one of the things that makes pour very interesting is its aging property. So I do want to emphasize that on the topic of aging, you typically see two extremes. One is in China, because we do not have a history or tradition of aging tea. This is very important. We don't have a tradition of aging tea. And the first, we'll call it the first year that you start to having people intentionally aging pu'er will be 2003. So you have a large amount of the aged tea that's really just borderline fraudulent, and it's really just leftover tea from the past era. It was not done in the intent for the tea to be aged. So on one hand, you have mostly scholars and people on the very conservative side argue that tea cannot be aged because we do not have an aging tradition. And on the other hand, you have the people who are very aggressively pushing the aging of the tea, which actually led to a pu'er bubble in China in 2007 and 2008. So the pu'er bubble, what happened was that the price of the pu'er keep going up because there were a lot of marketing language telling people to buy pu'er for its storage value and then for its collection value. But just as we all know, once you have illiquidity, then you have a bubble. So pu'er price has seen a big drop since then, and then it started to go back up again, but it was a good time that it was shuffled around, so a lot of inferior pu'er were produced during that era. And also that was the time when people confused the raw pu'er with the cooked pu'er, so a lot of the cooked pu'er were produced as a byproduct because people thought that was the older pu'er, even though it's just a black tea, and even when it has a very dark liqueur, so even when it's young it looks old, but people mistaken it for older pu'er. So because of all that, so you have people on the consumer side also either highly doubt the credential of the whole aging thing or the credibility of the whole aging thing, or on the other hand, people still firmly believe it and then wants to continue to invest in this. So I'm kind of in between. So to me, the question is, can tea be aged even though we do not have a aging tradition? And in my observation, I think pu'er can be aged because with the time go by, you definitely enjoy a transformation of the taste that maintains the tea's complexity and balance. And this is very important. This is distinctly different from tea just purely getting old, is that we often see with tea with with enzyme either killed or exhausted, so there's no enzymes to preserve. And what happens is the tea will just getting earthier and earthier. It becomes one-dimensional, right? So it's just like you're aging wine to maintain a level of complexity, but you're not aging it to become vinegar. They're two completely different things. And so same thing with the aging of the tea also, that you want to make sure it's very good tea to start with. And it's only those teas that's worth aging. You know, after all, you're not going to buy a bottle of $3 Chuck and then think that after 20 years this is now going to become an amazing bottle of wine. It's just not how it works. And same thing with tea. Sometimes there's also this saying that, you have to age a pu'er tea before you can drink it, which is completely not true, because the farmers always drink the current year's tea, because the farmers does not have pressing abilities. Even the largest tea mountain, which is Liang Shan, they only had a pressing facility 3-4 years ago, very recently. So you always had to rely on the people to purchase the rough tea and then take it to a pressing facility to pressing the tea separately. So the farmers do not drink aged tea at all. And the tea, after all, if it's not okay to be drank when it was first made, is probably not worth aging either. All right, so now I think I'm gonna take the camera off and then take it closer to me, and then I can see the questions, and we'll go into the Q&A session. All right, so I am going to take a look at the question box first. So, is it true that tea trees in Xishuangbanna have more caffeine than the rest of the tea trees in other areas? Yes and no. So I would say, say certain tea trees have more caffeine is definitely a overly general statement. But in general, so caffeine is a very critical compound for tea's photosynthesis. So in general, you can almost assume as the weather gets warmer and the tea have more sunlight, you will have more caffeine in the tea. That's why the summer teas will have more caffeine in the spring teas. But also, caffeine is very essential for the tea to develop its growth. So there are more caffeine in the buds, and for the larger varietals, the buds have larger girths, so it actually does have more caffeine. But this is, I would say, applies to all largely varietals, and probably applies to a lot of the Darjeeling teas as well. So if you're only going to make a general statement to say, does largely varietal tend to have more caffeine than smally varietal, which we typically see in colder tea region in the north, where some of the historical green teas are produced, then the answer is yes. However, it's not, without more context, you cannot find a very accurate answer for that. Next. Any reason to keep hot water in copper kettle before pouring, and any reason to use spring water? Yes, to use spring water. So this is definitely the spring water from all over the world have different compositions. To just say, using spring water is always better, does not even sound very right. However, in China, yes, culturally, the conventional wisdom is telling us that spring water is the best in comparison to the water that you get from the river or the water that you get from the well. And that much that I would say in general, it's pretty true. However, for each individual tea, if you have the ability, I would definitely encourage everyone to just try different water with different tea. And you do notice that water definitely impacts the taste of the tea. With certain amount of minerals, it definitely helps to present the tea's taste good. However, if it's too much mineral, if the water is too heavy, it's actually not a good thing either. And I have seen as much as even the tea must have binded with some kind of minerals in the tea, and it creates some kind of calcium, and it even have deposits in the strainer. So that's definitely not what we wanted. In general, in China, we say the water that comes from the tea region is the best water for the tea. keep hot water in copper. This is also another thing about conventional wisdom. In general, we say the tea loves copper. I don't know why, but in general, we think that tea works really well with copper, and that's why you see, even with a rolling machine, if people have the ability, the part that the lump that comes up is copper or a copper alloy instead of stainless steel. So that's a little bit more expensive. A copper wok is also more expensive. We have invested in our farmers for them to switch to copper wok. Copper wok costs about 10 times the price than an iron wok. One thing is, at least when you make tea with copper, it's less likely to be sticky. The tea does come out to taste a little cleaner. Even though I have talked with a few scientists about why the possibility copper works well with tea, and we cannot seem to find a very strict answer. So again, this falls into just culturally, yes, we think copper and tea works very well. I'm not sure copper and water, because I think this might create some kind of ion, and I don't think, I'm not sure copper ions are even entirely safe. What is the best way to brew Sheng Pu, Yixing pot, Gaiwan, or silver pot? So I would definitely use a Gaiwan. So I always say at some point in your tea journey, you have to decide, are you a tea person or are you a teapot person? Because they are in a way conflicting with each other. And so if you're a tea person and you're always looking for a brewing material that's very neutral, does not interact with the tea, so no metal, and also it's very high density and that does not take flavor away from the tea, so that makes porcelain and glass the better material. Of course, so when you say Yixing pot, Gaiwan, silver pot, we're actually really talking about two possible things. One is the vessel that you're using, and the other one is the material. Because you can use purple clay to make a gaiwan, right? And then you can have a porcelain teapot. So I would just talk about material-wise. I would definitely prefer porcelain or glass over anything else. Even though I think glass gaiwan is a little ugly, so that's the main reason I don't use a glass gaiwan. But material-wise, I think it's good. And also, I definitely prefer gaiwan. Is just because it allows a little bit more maneuverability with the vessel. What makes the tingling, buzzing sensation on the tongue? When do some tea have that and others don't? This can be so many different things. I think the buzzing sensation on the tongue, it can go from things that's very good to things that's very bad, because if the tea has a certain minerality, it can cause that. Certain tannins can cause that. Even if you have very strong amino acid with some like a Japanese green tea, you can also have those similar sensations. So I think it's really up to the definition. But in general, it's these compounds that stimulate our mouth. So the very least you can say is some kind of compounds in the tea that's abundant enough, or the molecules are large enough that you're feeling a sensation on your tongue. How do you get to the position where you can have your own tea room, make it your livelihood? Well, that I really don't know how to tell you, because this is really your own decision. It's kind of it's almost like, how do you make anything successful? But if I think everything is about the revenue and the cost, and also what so find out your expertise, and if you are able to figure out also the business aspect of it, then I think you have a livelihood that falls within your passion. Is there a tea that is more bitter than Lao Man E? So Laomange is a village that's so Laomange translates to old village of Mange, because there is another village called Xinmange, and this is a village in Liang Shan, and it's known for having some very bitter pu'er. And this is a very different kind of bitterness. It's not the typical bitterness that you experience either due to some flaws in the tea making or due to undesired picking grade. It's a bitterness that's so smooth, it does not coupled with any tannins almost. So I have personally never had a tea, if it's Camellia sinensis, that's more bitter than Lao Man in that kind of sense of bitterness. However, you can have a very inferior tea that's also very bitter and in a very unpleasant way that is more bitter than the Lao Man. But keep in mind, you can also have teas in from other families of Camellia, and it is very bitter as well. Right. And now let's also see a few questions from the feed. How do you not burn your fingers when pouring? So this is falls into the brewing session. So I'm only going to briefly talk about it, but basically do not hold on to the gaiwan itself. Hold on only to the edge of the gaiwan, and that's how you do not burn your finger. How many infusions for this pour? So pour also lasts for a long time. I would give it probably also 9 to 10 brews at least. The best pour I've had tend to be on the younger side, honestly. So the younger pour, I don't know if you're talking about the tea pour that's the mate tea is younger or comes from younger trees. So pour comes from younger trees usually tend to be much rough in its tannins. However, it does have tend to be more aromatic than the pour that come from the older trees though. And in terms of the pour of age, yes, as the pour age, the profile continue to change, and sometimes people prefer the more umami-ness and the floralness of a pour, than the younger age of mate tea will satisfy that much more than the taste of the older pour, which is slowly goes into a dry fruit note, and it become more and more intense of like a dry fruit. Copper is conductive and looks aesthetic. Also, they say it makes it sweeter. I mean, I haven't seen copper making the tea sweeter, but definitely cleaner, which can also just be a result for the tea not sticking on the wok as much in comparison to if you use iron wok. Can you go over heirloom versus clones again? Yeah, so heirlooms are tea trees that you planted with a so basically, it's not necessarily the tea trees that comes from a seed only, but the first generation definitely is the ones that come from a seed only. So these are the indigenous tea trees of a region that haven't been systematically altered by human. And clones all come from saplings. So every single tea tree in this, if they're this one type of clone, they're all the same. So you do not have to worry about them budding at uneven times. But of course, if there is any disastrous events such as certain pests, certain disease, or even frauds, things like that, it can also wipe out a whole lot of tea as well. What is hei cha specifically? So hei cha is Chinese black tea. That's literally what hei cha is in Chinese black tea. And then those are the post-fermented tea, which we're going to go over tomorrow. Can you please explain about hei cha? Because hei cha is actually the topic that we'll go over tomorrow, so I will save that for tomorrow. Oh yeah, younger tea tree from Gushu it has a very nice bitterness. Also depends on the tea mountain. I know Nan Shan, Liang Shan both are known for having in Chinese we call it the fragrance bitterness. Like it's bitter, but it has a fragrance to it, and it's very, very satisfying. From a young age, I dig those tastes. Why did you start to learn about tea and tea culture? I grew up drinking tea, so this is just something that's kind of been part of my life. It was not me made the decision to, from today on I'm going to study tea. I've heard that show method was developed in the 70s by Mellow Sheng Pu. Is that not true? Yeah, so we can talk about this more tomorrow. But a Sheng Pu, yes, it was invented in the 70s, and it was not to mimic a Sheng Pu. Actually, I have gone through this in depth in our Pur videos, which is on IGTV now. No, is it on IGTV? If it's not on IGTV, it will be on IGTV in the next couple of days. And then so definitely take a look at that. Do regions near to ocean or sorry, I had to. Oh, there we go. Do regions near to ocean or coast necessarily mean it will have umami flavor? Where does umami come from? Is it specifically the amino acids? Yes, the umami note for tea, at least for what we know, definitely comes from the amino acids. So umami is different from savoriness. I think if you're an Asian person, you'll probably know this. Like saltiness and umami note is very different. So does the tea that come from the seaside tend to be saltier? I think so, because I have when I was young, I haven't had this tea since. I've had a tea from the Hainan province, which is a province. The whole province is an island. It was a white tea from there and was very, very salty. They come from the seaside. I remember when I was little, I had a very deep memory of that tea. Do you still have Julie in the tea house? Oh, yes, we do have Julie in the tea house, but we have not put it on the website. Where can I read or find more information about poorer villages and mountains? There is a book that's written by a historian. I think the name of the book is called 西双版纳普洱茶的故乡. But again, I haven't found a reputable book in English. So this is a book in Chinese. All right, and we see the typed questions. Which mountain produces the most fruity pu'er? So fruitiness of the tea usually comes out with aging, but in terms of sweetness, I would say on the west side of Lancang River, Damengsong is a mountain that has very fruity pu'er. One time we had some naka, which is very pleasant. It's a very easy to drink, slightly sweet pu'er. It was some of customers' favorite. So Damengsong is definitely an area with sweet pu'er. And on the east side of the river, I would say Youle is the sweet mountain. What is the difference between a personality and a character tea? So, what is the difference between one's personality and character, right? So a person I would say things like kindness, integrity, those falls into character, but outgoing, introvert, these are probably falls into more of a personality. So I would say a character tea, has a sense of, so this goes into like a Chinese tea culture and philosophy. So it has a sense of virtue, and it's and a personality tea oftentimes gives you it's your own preference, right? So I think for character teas, there are some universal agreement. I think we all love people who are kind, who are nice, who are brave, who have integrity, who are honest. And personality depends on your own personality. Sometimes you like people who are outgoing, who make jokes, who are fun, and then sometimes you like people who just can be quiet and then read a book with you, play a game with you, things like that. So that's the difference between the personality and the character tea. Even after 5 brews, my tea break hasn't expanded that much yet. Is it normal? So if it hasn't expanded, it'll either because of it hasn't sit in water for long enough, so give it a little bit more time, or because the water is not boiling. We definitely want to make sure we use boiling water to make the tea open up. If it doesn't open up completely, it's fine, but it needs to feel like it's opening up or it's kind of loose. What is the fundamental difference in spring versus fall picked leaf? Is there a chemical difference that will make so the question is only the question is cut off, so I can only read the first part. What is the fundamental difference in spring versus fall picked leaves? Is there a chemical difference that will make something. Let me just talk about the difference between spring and fall leaves. So the spring leaves are always more nutrition rich. So you can assume that it has more abundance of compounds and therefore complexity. It's also more moist, it's more tender. The fall leaves, even if it's a very good quality fall leaves, you can't help but feel there's a little bit of dryness in the tea. We only have 1 minute left, so I want to. How many brew for this pour? I already answered that. So it is about 9 to 10 brews. Is it true that show method was? Oh, I already answered that as well. All right. Okay. Have you ever gotten stomach ache from pour? If it's really, really bad pour, I can imagine one with a sensitive stomach might experience that. But at the same time, I do personally have a very strong stomach, so it's probably unlikely that I have that. I have had only with sheer volume. Sometimes when I'm so hungry with no food in my stomach and I really overdid it with too much tea, that's when I start having a little bit of stomach ache. All right, thank you everyone, and we'll see you tomorrow.